Hi, I'm Doug from Dynamic Computing, and welcome to episode 138 of 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast. This week we're revisiting an old friend, my Amiga 4000, which you'll see right there, sans cover and in some pieces. Now, I absolutely adore my Amiga 4000. I've presented it on many shows in the past, but I haven't been using it much over the past year, which sounds kind of strange, doesn't it? But that's because I've got so many other Amigas that I'm working on projects with. I've been doing a ton with my Amiga 1200. Earlier in the year, I did a ton with my Amiga 600. Before that, I did a ton with my Amiga 3000. So sometimes these other Amigas just get pushed off in a corner and not used much. The other issue with my Amiga 4000 is she's just not reliable on startup. Once she's started, flawless, absolutely works beautifully. And we're going to go over and look at what's inside her in a minute. But getting her started is sometimes a problem. When you start an Amiga 4000, you generally hear a couple little, I generally hear a couple little chirps because my accelerator card kicks in. I've got the Warp Engine accelerator card with a 68060 on it. It's a modified 68040, the little tray that allows you to use a 68060. You'll see in a minute. But I'll hear a little bong noise, kind of like the Amiga 1000 startup noise, if it starts properly. And a lot of times it just doesn't do that. I don't hear anything, and I get a black screen. The lights come on, and it initializes the SCSI. I can see the SCSI to SD flash. Nothing. And I have to go in, and I have to move the accelerator a little. Maybe pop it out, and then pop it back in, and reseat it, and tweak it, and then turn it on, and it might work, and it might not. And I go in, and I reseat it again, and I tweak it, and I do this, and I do that. Maybe it comes on, maybe it doesn't. Finally, after 3 or 4 minutes of fiddling around with this accelerator, I'll get the bong noise, it'll come up, it'll work flawless. And the weird thing is, it'll work flawless for a day, maybe 2 days. I can power it down for 2 or 3 hours, power it back up, it's fine. I can use it. You know, of course, I get the traditional, Amiga gurus now and again, who doesn't? But in general, she's a reliable system. But then if I let it sit for 2 days, 3 days, same thing happens. I want to get to the bottom of it. So first, let's take a look at the Amiga itself. Of course, the Amiga 4000 is a kind of a cramped machine. Normally, of course, I've got my faceplate on it. Ta-da! But I've got that off today. I've got a SCSI to SD from my friend Alex Perez. I've got a 1.8 megabyte floppy drive. This is one of the high density floppy drives. Works great. And behind the little tray is where we have my accelerator. This is the really, really nice Warp Engine 68040 40 megahertz version of the Warp Engine. This was the Amiga 3000 version, but I had Paul, aka Asil, turn it basically into the A4000 version, which adds 2 more RAM sockets to get her up to 128 megs max. And I bought this little tower here, which you'll see closer later, that converts a 68060, of which I have one of the full versions. I think it's a Rev 5 I have in here. And it allows you to use it in almost any socketed 68040 board. It works absolutely perfect at full 68060 speeds. This is the little guy that I'm fairly certain gives me all the problems. And we're going to test it out right now. We're going to try and power it up. There's the monitor I have, the one with all the glare on it. Let's see if I can unglarify it. There we go. Monitor's on. We're going to hit the power. And if it decides to come on, we'll hear a little bong. Okay, we heard the bong this time. When I turned it on 2 minutes ago, 3 minutes ago, okay, 10 minutes ago, I did not hear anything from it. It just didn't start. Tried to boot it a second time, it starts. That's what I want to eliminate. And you see it comes right up with my lovely picture of Andy Warhol and Debbie Harry at the Amiga introduction. And it's a nice, fast machine. This is a clever one, and I'll link above to some shows I've done on it. But I honestly want to discover why she acts unreliably. So we're going to take this little guy apart and we're going to see what we can find. Well, first we'll remove the SCSI from the warp engine, and I'll remove all of my power connectors from my floppies and my SCSI to SD. So one of the things you'll see is that my warp engine almost seems like it's at a little bit of an angle here. See how it kind of hangs down? And that's because sometimes it works better like that, which makes me think it's a problem with the contacts on the little CPU connector in here. I do have oftentimes little braces that hold it up straight. I've used a couple of different varieties to hold it up straight, and sometimes they seem to work and sometimes they don't. And I'm just tired of the frustration of fighting with this thing. The accelerator slot on the 68040, or on the Amiga 3000 and 4000, is not known for being the best thing in the universe. It's got this, I think it's a 100-pin connector here, and when they sit down, they just kind of have some weight, and they just don't always sit level. So they have these little peg holes here for putting the plastic pegs in to keep it level on the motherboard. The problem is it doesn't always help in my case, and sometimes it doesn't boot when it's completely level. Very frustrating. So what we want to do is we want to take a look and see if there's any problem with the connector on the card itself, and we want to look and see if there's any problem with the connector on the motherboard. But let's try to boot this up with just a generic 68040 card that came with it. So this will be the boring old 68040 25 megahertz card that comes with the Amiga 4000. This is the A3640. This was redone and upgraded to the latest ROMs on here, 3.2 ROMs, by my good friend Frank at Retro Rewind, who's right in Canada and ships all over the world. You guys know and love him. Usually when I use one of these cards, the Amiga 4000 boots up every time, albeit just in standard 68040 mode, and this, we should just get the kickstart screen because I've got no floppy or hard drive plugged in. Let's take a look and see if it works. And so I have the composite output for it, since it won't work with my RTG card without booting to Workbench. I've got my composite hooked up to this monitor. We're going to power up the Amiga 4000 and see what she comes up with. I put the floppy back on so we don't have to wait 30 seconds for it, and look at it. Absolutely perfect with my A3640 card. So does that mean there's a problem with my warp engine? I don't know. We're going to find out. Now we're going to test out and look at our hardware and look for cracks and such with this cool new device. This is the Magnifamometer 3000, which is a name I completely made up. But basically what this is designed as, it's designed to help people who have vision problems be able to put things on this platform and then move it around in all directions and then magnify it brilliantly on the screen. So you see I've got this nice Amiga Love logo here and this nice Kung Fu flash. But let's see what kind of magnification we can get out of this little thing. Turn this dial to magnify it. And look at that. There's our emu in living color, all magnified. I bet good old Rod Hull is proud of this right now, isn't he? Look at that. There's his eyeball. Ha! Kung Fu. Now, cool story. I did a review on this particular board, which is my warp engine, a couple of years ago. And then one of these guys actually saw, one of the designers and creators of the board actually saw the video for it and watched it and waxed all sentimental over it. So we'll use their names as a test to zoom in on. This little guy will automatically focus even on 3D objects like this. And it does a pretty darn good job. Producer, Bob Tingley. SCSI Software, William J. Coldwell. For some reason I'm thinking it was William Coldwell that I talked to. I need to find that message. It spells a bad word there. Don't look at that word. Oh, that's better. Now, some of the cool things about this particular device. See all these little traces here? We can look and see if any of the traces are theoretically bad by zooming in. Now I know the traces are not bad on this because when the board works, it works perfectly. But if we were trying to diagnose something and we were looking at, say, traces and trying to look for a break, look what we can do here. We can hit the mode button, it goes shifts into black and white mode, hit it again. It's now reverse image mode. Now watch this. When you reverse it again, you can see some of the cool details that you could not see before. Here's an actual better example of that. So we can see the traces there. When we go into reverse image modes, it actually kind of enunciates them even more, and you can look for breaks in the actual connections right down here in this reverse mode. You can also adjust the brightness up and down. See, when I adjust the brightness down, the traces stand out even more, and you're able to see and fairly easily see if you can find a little break in any of the traces. And again, I don't have any on here, I'm sure. The thing that I'm really curious about is the connector right here, and seeing if we have any issues or breaks or cracks in the actual physical connector. So I want to use my magnifier to see if I can see any breaks in here. And it's trying to focus on the text in the back, not so much on the connector. Let's try a different mode. Nope, none of those look good. That seems to be about the best magnification for looking for breaks. And so I'm physically looking along here, seeing if I can find any cracks that's maybe making the connector a little bit weak. And so far, it's looking fairly decent. That's frustrating. I was kind of hoping I'd find something physically on here that would explain all my problems. Well, all my computer problems. So now we're going at this at a different angle. I'm holding the board up at a different angle. Oh look, there's my thumb. That's attractive. And we're going to change the brightness a little bit here. And we're going to look at this connector. Maybe zoom in a little bit more. See, it's picking up all the little disgusting hairs on the connector. But I'm not seeing any physical defects or breaks on the connector. But you can see how useful this magnifier, Magnifamometer is going to be for me to find flaws and breaks in items. Yeah, that's actually looking really good. Now, could it be that some of the contacts are just a little dirty from years of use and abuse? It is possible, and we are going to clean those contacts in a couple of minutes. This is also useful if you're trying to identify specific chips, and like me, your eyeballs don't work like they used to. Now we can zoom in right on a little chip and see exactly things like this when you're doing really, really fine work, like soldering on like a 68030 or something like that. This can be really useful in determining if you've got any solder that's maybe bridging a connection here. That should identify that right away. And in some of these other modes, like the like this mode, might be really useful looking to see if you've got maybe bridged a connection between a couple of solder points that you would not be able to see quite as well with the naked eye. Speaking of solder points, you know, this is the back end of the actual connector. I should look here and see if I see any, you know, maybe a cold solder joint or a piece of solder that's out of place or not really good. Maybe it's just not making a reliable connection. Now what I do see is I need to blow this board off because it's covered in icky, disgusting little dust. Now that actually looks pretty icky right there. Wonder what that is. Let's take a zoom out. It's right below jumper 3. It's JP4, and it actually looks weird. So that may be something I want to investigate, see if there's anything wrong with that particular connection right there. This is a good way to look at these little itsy bitsy tiny resistors here, the ones that I absolutely hate trying to solder on, to make sure that you don't have any broken solder joints or, you know, maybe a cap leaked on it, something like that. Nice little tool for looking at all the fine stuff. We're going to do one final angle on the actual connector. This is the back part of the connector here. And it's focusing fairly well on it. And again, I'm not seeing any cracks, I'm not seeing any breaks. That connector is looking like it's connectifying just fine. So we've determined the board appears physically to be in good shape with no physical damage. But these connectors can always get yucky and oxidized over the years. After all, this is a 25-year-old accelerator board here. And you can't really get a Q-tip down in here to clean those contacts in there. So my buddy from Birt Productions, you know him, he's a great guy. The link to his show will be right in the description. But what he said is he sometimes takes a piece of cardboard like this that's just the right size, maybe to fit down in between here, and he'll use that to clean it off. So we'll spray a little bit of isopropyl. We'll start with that, and then after that I think I'll put on some contact cleaner. Fill her up. All right, then we'll use the cardboard, and what the cardboard does, of course, is helps clean off any of the gunk by putting just a little bit of friction on all those pins. So I thought that was a really clever idea. Even guys from the Ozark Mountains come up with awesome plans now and again. So we'll clean that up but good. And we of course have to get both sides. Now I'll turn it around and clean the other side. Now visually inspecting this, it didn't look particularly oxidized, but as you guys know, sometimes you need to clean something and clean it again and clean it again and then clean it a 5th or 10th time, and then everything is peaches and cream. So here's what we've accomplished. We've cleaned out this contact area right here, all those contacts with the cardboard, and I used isopropyl alcohol, and then I cleaned it again using electronics contact cleaner. Then I took a little hot glue and I put a couple of these standoffs on here, so they'll be semi-permanent, but with hot glue it's easy enough just to peel it off. If I need to get longer or shorter ones or whatnot, I can either trim them or I can replace them with a little longer ones. And now I'm going to go see if it makes any difference in the reliability of booting my Amiga 4000. Come on with me. Now I've also gone and I've cleaned the connector on the inside here nice and thoroughly, both with isopropyl and with contact cleaner, using the same little trick with a piece of cardboard to slide it in there and clean it. Looked absolutely fine. I didn't see any issues. So now we're going to pop the little accelerator back in, and we're going to see what happens if it seems to boot any more reliably. She's in there nice and snug. Now we're going to look at the monitor that we boot from, and we're going to see if we get a kickstart screen. And while this does look promising, I had to seat and unseat the card 3 times in order to get the kickstart screen to come up. Now that I've done it, let's see if that works reliably. We're going to power it down. Okay, we give it about 8 to 10 seconds. We're going to power it up, see if it goes boom. Yeah, it bongs, so that means the kickstart screen is going to come up. Could I just have had it set in there wrong to begin with a moment ago? It's always possible. I'm going to pop the card out, pop it back in, run a few more tests, and we're going to see what happens. So she's booting reliably. I've put the card in and taken it out several times and adjusted it, moved it up and down, tweaked it a little bit. Every single time it boots now, and I haven't had that experience before. I always had to tweak it and, okay, it's right there, it's working, okay, now don't touch anything, and in 3 days it stops booting again. So the test is going to be letting it sit for a couple of days and see if it continues to boot reliably like it's doing right now. Right now I can restart it, I can shut it down, turn it on, every single time boots perfectly in 68060 mode. So while I don't want to declare it finished yet, I do want to say it's more reliable than it was before, and for that I'm quite thankful. Next episode, we're going to go back to the Amiga 4000. We're going to look at some of the things that this little guy contains, because she's got a lot of power under the hood there. And we're going to play with some of that power. But I do want to make sure she boots reliably before we go on and do more episodes about this. Thanks to my wonderful patrons for all your help, for voting in the Amiga Art Contest, and for all the wonderful things that you do. If you'd like to become one of my patrons and help support the channel, pop on over to patreon.com/10mark, and for as little as $2 a month, your name can be on this illustrious list. Wouldn't you be lucky if it was? Thanks a lot for joining me today. We're going to explore some of the video solutions I have for the RGB video out here, because of course when you're dealing with RTG graphics here, you still want a way to get your RGB graphics, your regular traditional AGA graphics, to come out. We're going to look at some options for that, and we're going to look at some options for expandability in the Amiga 4000, including talking about some cool, new, powerful things that hopefully I'll have within the next week or two that we can talk about. Please follow me on Twitter while it still exists at 10mark1. Follow me on Instagram, on the Facebook, just about anywhere. Just follow me. I'd love to hear from you. Please like and subscribe, and tell your friends about the channel too. If you've got Amiga friends, send them my way. I would love to be introduced to them. But until next time, this is Doug, Andy, and Debbie signing out. Come on, guys, do the finger thing. Andy, Debbie, come on. The finger thing, it's my trademark. I just can't get good help these days.